Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish to speak in support of the gentleman from...
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to speak in support of the gentleman from New Jersey's substitute. The number one job of this government, of this Congress, of this committee ought to be jobs. Our number one job ought to be jobs. And as I've listened to this debate, which I guess started at 10 a.m. this morning, I do not believe the proponents of this legislation have carried the burden of persuasion that this is going to help create new jobs in our economy. Quite the opposite. What we hear is increased capital standards for people who are trying to curtail risk. We're talking about capital that could be used to create new jobs, save the jobs that we have. And again, I just fundamentally believe that we have laws, amendments that kind of thrash about the branches of the problem but don't go to the root. And that is, we've got legislation dealing now with derivatives. I still pose the question once again, with the exception of AIG's credit default swaps, I'm still trying to figure out where the finger is pointed and why we need a sweeping new federal regulatory regime for a derivatives market that helps ensure more efficiency, greater capital applied to job creation than otherwise would be. We're going to reduce that for what benefit? For what benefit? Again, the regulatory authority was there with OTS. Again, perhaps not the expertise, perhaps not the courage, perhaps they were negligent, but they had the regulatory authority. And as we know, the FDIC has the authority to take prompt corrective action. It just seems to me that the underlying legislation is not needed. The Republican substitute would not harm job creation, and if a case can be made, the Republican substitute will create greater transparency. So if regulators want to come to Congress and make the case that some of the more onerous aspects of this law are somehow needed to reduce risk, I have no doubt, but that the committee would certainly have an open mind, but just to presume to give them this authority, not knowing how it will be exercised, how much capital could be reduced, and how many people would no longer venture to risk capital because they could no longer afford the proper hedging. And again, I know that the chairman has taken a number of steps to make this certainly less onerous than what the administration had originally proposed. But at the end of the day, I do not think the burden of persuasion at a time where 3 million of our countrymen have lost their jobs since January, when we're having almost 10% unemployment, the greatest unemployment in 26 years, the first thing we need to do is get out of this recession. That continues to be job number one, and I feel the underlying legislation is counterproductive to that. And so I would certainly urge all of my colleagues to support the Republican substitute as offered by the gentleman from New Jersey, and I yield back the balance of my time.